Hello and welcome. This is a video recording of the cardiovascular system, and we are looking in Chapter 5 of your textbook. So I will be going through the PowerPoint packet as was posted in the Blackboard folder under the Syllabus tab, and we're starting on page 89 of the lecture packet, looking at the functions of the cardiovascular system. And as we go along, I'm going to switch over to some animations and some colored pictures from your note packet that come from your textbook. So we're starting on page 89, looking at the top at the functions of the cardiovascular system. There is a slide below that on page 89, the lymphatic system. That's there in error. That should not be there. So if you want to just cross this slide off for now, that'll be our next topic. So we're just going to ignore that. So looking at the cardiovascular system, there's two words in the word cardiovascular system, which tells us the parts of the cardiovascular. And we look at cardio, that means heart. Vascular is referring to vessels. So we're looking at the arteries, veins, and capillaries working together with the heart as a pump to pump blood through those vessels. So when you look at the functions of the cardiovascular system, it's mainly transport, moving oxygen and carbon dioxide throughout the body, releasing carbon dioxide as it's pumped to the lungs, and bringing in oxygen and delivering it to the rest of the body from the lungs. So the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system really work together in delivering oxygen and carbon dioxide. So the transport is occurring through the blood, and that includes the vessels that transport blood, which are the arteries, veins, and capillaries. So within the blood, we have the ability to protect ourselves from infection. So we have the white blood cells that are transported in the blood that make up the immune system. So we'll talk more about that when we get specifically into the lymphatic and immune system after this unit on the cardiovascular system. And then regulation is another important function of the cardiovascular system. Because of the blood that it transports, it is able to maintain pH balance and electrolyte levels. Remember, electrolytes are things like sodium ion, potassium ion, magnesium, chloride, all those ions we bring in through the different foods we eat, and those are transported by the blood. So very important for maintaining homeostasis is to have this ability to transport these important substances throughout the body to maintain homeostasis. So we're going to skip over that slide and look at the types of vessels that we have. So to do that, I'm going to switch over to the photo that's in your notes, and then we'll talk about these different vessels. So looking at our vessels here, we see that there are three types. There's arteries, veins, and capillaries. The capillaries are the smallest of the vessels. So first, looking at arteries, what's unique about arteries is they carry blood away from the heart. That's a hard and fast rule that you can remember, is arteries carry blood away from the heart. So it could be the pulmonary artery carrying deoxygenated blood away from the heart to the lungs to pick up oxygen. So that's an artery that has low oxygen content. And the other arteries all carry oxygenated blood away from the heart to the different parts of the body to deliver oxygen. So the pulmonary artery is a little different than the rest of the arteries in that it has the low oxygen blood. So arteries, because they're pumping blood to the rest of the body away from the heart, they are under higher pressure than the other vessels. So as a result, they have a thick muscular wall to allow that pressure wave to travel throughout that side of the vasculature. So arteries carry blood under higher pressure. They have a thicker muscular wall. It's made up of smooth muscle. So all vessels, arteries and veins, that is, have three layers. They have a thin inner layer called the endothelium, which is subject to clogging if it gets fatty streaks or plaques and clots that develop there that lead to heart attack and stroke. And then it has a middle layer, which is made of smooth muscle, and then an outer connective tissue layer. So it's this middle muscular layer that really makes arteries unique from the other vessels in the body. And then if we look at veins, veins are larger in diameter. So when we look at the veins, most of the blood in your body is carried in the veins at any one point in time, just because they have a larger diameter, a larger space for that blood. Here's a cross section. We can definitely see the difference between the size of veins versus arteries. Veins have a lot more blood in them, but they have a thinner muscular wall because they don't operate under pressure. Instead, they have valves which prevent backflow, and keep the blood moving forward toward the heart. But veins, a hard and fast rule is they carry blood to the heart. So veins, most veins contain deoxygenated, low oxygen blood, except for the pulmonary vein, which is bringing fresh blood back to the heart from the lungs. So veins are low pressure vessels. They contain valves to prevent backflow, and they are carrying blood to the heart. So they have a thinner muscular wall compared to arteries, but a larger diameter. So connecting arteries and veins, we have capillaries. Capillaries have only one layer of tissue, so they do not have a smooth muscle layer. They're very thin, simple squamous epithelium vessels, which are the sites of exchange. So they're porous, they're leaky. They allow nutrients to leak out into the interstitial fluid and feed our tissues, and they also bring waste products in to carry them away to be excreted through the kidneys or through the lungs or other excretory passageways, which we'll talk about as we get to those different systems. But for now, what's important for you to know is the major differences between these vessels. And again, we said thinner muscular layer, larger diameter, smaller diameter, thicker muscular layer, and the capillaries are the sites of exchange where we can actually, things can enter and leave the blood. Things do not enter and leave through the arteries and veins. They only enter and leave through the capillaries. So what controls blood flow through a capillary bed are these small muscular sphincters, which can constrict and prevent things from leaving the blood supply, and it remains in the capillary bed. So we can see there's kind of this main vessel that connects the artery to the vein. If these precapillary sphincters contract, it will prevent that blood from leaving this main shunt, and it'll stay in the bloodstream. For example, if you're jogging or exercising and the body's in a state of stress, we're not going to have a lot of blood flow to the digestive tract. So these capillary sphincters will constrict, and blood will flow right from the arteries to the veins without giving a lot of blood supply to that digestive tract. And the opposite is true. If you're relaxing, you're going to see more blood supply to the digestive tract. So these precapillary sphincters would dilate, or not dilate, they would relax and allow blood flow to leave the arteries and then enter the capillary bed and deliver nutrients and pick up waste from the cells of the digestive tract. So that's when we're in a relaxed state. So we can control what comes and goes from the blood by having control of these precapillary sphincters. And oftentimes it just depends on the blood supply to those different organs, whether those sphincters are going to relax or constrict, controlling the blood supply to those tissues. So now that we know a little bit about the vessels, we'll move on and look at parts of the heart. So I'm moving on looking at, just kind of go back to where we were here, and I'll show you where we are in the notes. So we talked about blood vessels, we talked about the capillaries, their sites of exchange, so that's the key word there that you want to highlight or underline, and remember that precapillary sphincters control blood flow through that capillary bed. So there's the photo that I was going through. And we talked about veins, that they have valves, they have less smooth muscle in that middle layer, and they can hold more blood. So 70% of the blood in our body is in the veins of the bloodstream. So now we're going to talk about the heart. So the heart is a muscular pump. So we talk about the heart being mostly myocardium, which just means cardiac muscle tissue. And it is a two-sided pump. It has 4 chambers. And I'm going to go back to some of the photos that we have for this chapter. So this is a nice view, external view of the heart. So we can see there's 2 chambers at the top of the heart. These are the atria. They receive blood into the heart. So we'll always see veins leading to the atria, bringing blood to the heart, because we said veins carry blood to the heart. So we have the superior vena cava here and the inferior vena cava here, and the pulmonary veins, which are colored red here because they're carrying freshly oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. So that goes into the left atrium. So we're looking at a patient who's facing us. So this is the left side, this is the left atrium and the right atrium. And then we see these vessels that kind of run down this groove of the heart. So this is the left ventricle showing here, and this is the right ventricle here. So it looks like the right ventricle is larger, but actually it's not. The volume of these ventricles is the same, but this one extends more over to the backside of the heart, which we can't see in this view. But whether it's the right ventricle or the left ventricle, these are the lower muscular pumping chambers. They pump blood away from the heart. So we'll always see arteries associated with these ventricles. So this here is the pulmonary artery. So when the right ventricle contracts, it delivers its blood to the pulmonary arteries, which will lead to the lungs to pick up oxygen. So we can see that the pulmonary artery here is blue because it has low oxygen content. And whenever we're looking at diagrams in a textbook, it shows those vessels as blue or red. But keep in mind that blood vessels are not blue or red. Blood is always red. It's either dark red if it's low in oxygen or bright red if it's high in oxygen. We only use the blue color just to indicate differences in oxygen concentration in a textbook or a diagram. It's not really the way it is in our in the body. So we have the right and left atrium, we have the right and left ventricles down below. Those are the 4 chambers of the heart. So remember that the atria bring blood, receive blood into the heart from the veins, and the ventricles send blood to the arteries when they contract. So when you look at the heart itself, it is surrounded by a it's made up of muscular tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, but it also has a connective tissue sac around it. That's been removed here, so we don't see that. But there's a connective tissue sac that protects the heart, and it's surrounded by fluid, and that fluid just helps lubricate and reduce friction. So when the heart is contracting and relaxing as it fills with blood, it does that in a smooth, low friction manner. So we're going to move on and talk about the inside parts of the heart. So I'm on page 94. And dividing the chambers of the heart are these important valves. So we see these 2 large valves. This is the right atrioventricular valve, also known as the tricuspid valve. And this is the left atrioventricular valve, or left AV valve, also known as the mitral valve. So these valves are really tough connective tissue dividing structures that help prevent backflow. So as blood flows through here and the ventricles contract, as blood pushes against the backside of these ventricles, that causes them to shut, and that gives you your first heart sound, the lub sound of the lubbed up of your heartbeat. The lub is the closing of the left and right AV valves as the ventricles contract. Then that blood enters into the pulmonary artery and the aorta, and there are valves at the roof of the left and right ventricle that also will close as blood flows backward during ventricular relaxation. So a good way to understand the function of these valves is to watch an animation, and I'll show you that shortly. But just do know the structures here. We have the right and left. This is the right AV valve or tricuspid valve. This is the left AV valve or mitral valve. This is the pulmonary valve. And the one valve that we can't see in this diagram is the aortic valve. That's at the base of the aorta, and that extends down into the left ventricle. So if I was able to look at the roof of the left ventricle here, I would see a valve that looks just like this, but it's at the base of the aorta, because this aorta extends down into the left ventricle, and that would be the aortic valve. And we'll look at that a little bit later. So I'm going to show you here we can see in this diagram, it does show that aortic valve there. So this is at the base of the aorta. We can see it's in the left ventricle. And the pulmonary valve, also called the semilunar valve, it is in the right ventricle. So blood is going to pump up into the pulmonary artery, and it's going to cause those valves to close. So the closing of the AV valves is the lub, and the closing of the aortic and pulmonary valves, the semilunar valves, is the dup. So it's lubbed up, lubbed up, lubbed up. Here we can see a cross-section view of the aortic valve. And under a lot of pressure, that aortic valve is, because the left side of the heart is the high pressure side, because it's pumping that blood to the whole body, not just to the lungs like the right side of the heart is. So we're going to look at an animation now of that, and we'll see how those valves work in action.
The heart is a muscle about the size of your fist. It lies behind and to the left of your breastbone or sternum. The purpose of the heart is to pump blood through blood vessels, arteries, and veins to all parts of your body. The inside of the heart is divided into 4 chambers. The top 2 chambers are called the atria and are collection chambers for blood. The bottom 2 chambers are called the ventricles and receive the blood from the atria and pump it to the lungs and the body. The chambers are separated by valves, which control the direction of blood flow. There are 4 valves: tricuspid, pulmonic, mitral, and aortic. Circulation begins at the right side of the heart, where blood from the body comes to the right atrium. This blood passes to the right ventricle, where it is pumped to the lungs to receive oxygen. Once it receives oxygen, it flows to the left atrium and then to the left ventricle, where it is pumped to the aorta and the rest of the body. On the right side of the heart, the tricuspid valve separates the right atrium and the right ventricle, allowing blood to enter the ventricle but not flow backwards to the atrium. Blood flows through the pulmonic valve to go to the lungs. On the left side of the heart, the mitral valve separates the left atrium and the left ventricle. Blood flows from the left ventricle to the aorta through the aortic valve and to the rest of the body. Arteries carry blood with oxygen and other nutrients throughout the body. Veins take blood back to the heart, which pumps it to the lungs to be oxygenated. The heart arteries, coronary arteries, provide oxygen and nutrients to the heart muscle.
Here we have another video showing the closing of the valves and the specific heart sounds that they make.
When a healthy heart beats, it makes a lub-dub sound. The first heart sound, lub, also known as S1, is caused by the closing of the AV valves after the atria have pumped blood into the ventricles. The second heart sound, dub, or S2, originates from the closing of the aortic and pulmonary valves right after the ventricles have ejected the blood. The time interval between S1 and S2 is when the ventricles contract, called systole. The interval between S2 and the next S1 is when the ventricles relax and are filled with blood, called diastole. Diastole is longer than systole, hence the lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. Heart sounds are auscultated at 4 different sites on the chest wall, which correspond to the location of blood flow as it passes through the aortic, pulmonic, tricuspid, and mitral valves, respectively. This is how similar defects associated with different valves are differentiated. Heart murmurs are whooshing sounds produced by turbulent flow of blood. Murmurs are diagnosed based on the time they occur in the cardiac cycle, their changes in intensity over time, and the auscultation site where they are best heard. Examples of conditions associated with common systolic murmurs include mitral valve regurgitation, when the mitral valve does not close properly and blood surges back to the left atrium during systole. The murmur starts at S1 when the AV valves close and maintains the same intensity for the entire duration of systole. This hollow systolic murmur is best heard at the mitral region, the apex, with radiation to the left axilla. On the other side of the heart, a tricuspid valve regurgitation has similar timing and shape, but is loudest in the tricuspid area, and the sound radiates up along the left sternal border.
So the mitral valve regurgitation is the most common, and that's what you're going to probably maybe be, have some experience with. Maybe you know somebody that has that particular murmur. It's very common. So we're going to go back to our PowerPoint now. I can put this here. Computer's not cooperating. There we go. Okay, so going back to our notes here, we talked about the atria and the chambers. We talked about the valves. We talked about the vessels. So you should be able to label each of these parts. I will include a blank worksheet on Blackboard for you to practice labeling the parts. And part of your exam, too, will cover that as well. So we've got the 2 valves that we looked at already. I'm going to pull up the colored picture from your textbook. So we've got the AV valves, the pulmonary valve, the other valve on the aorta is not shown in this diagram very well, but we can see it here. So when they close, that's the dup sound, and when the AV close, that's the dub sound. So we're looking at the next topic, which is page 97. We just finished kind of talking about the different phases of the heart as it contracts. So when the ventricles contract, we call that, or the atria contract to push their blood, we call that systole. So heart muscle contraction is called systole. And when the heart muscle relaxes and the heart begins to fill with blood again, that is called diastole. So that when the ventricles are filling with blood, it's ventricular diastole. So a murmur is anytime we have an incomplete closing of the valves and blood flows backward through the heart, which it's not supposed to do, and we're going to hear that kind of swooshing sound between the lub and the dup as that blood swooshes backward. So when we look at the heart, it has a conduction system that controls the heartbeat, and that starts in the wall, the upper roof of the right atrium. It's the SA node. So the SA node determines the impulse in which that's carried across the heart wall to create contraction. So the impulse is a nervous impulse, starts in the SA node, travels to the AV node, goes down the AV bundle to the bundle branches, and then up the walls of the ventricles, which are called the Purkinje fibers. So this is the electric pathway for impulses to travel through the heart muscle, and it drives the heartbeat. So the SA node fires first, and it has the most rapid rate of impulses, so that drives the heart rate. And if the SA node should fail, then the AV node will take over, and at a slightly lower rate. And then if the AV node fails, the rest of the pathway here can take over, the bundle branches, the bundle of His, which is right here, or the AV bundle, or the Purkinje fibers. They can take over the heart rate, but again, it's going to be at a much slower rate. And it's not at a rate that is good for activity and moving around. The best heart rates are achieved by the SA node and the AV node firing their impulses, which is faster. The SA node fires at about 100 beats per minute, but with the other nervous system controls that affect the SA node, that brings the SA node impulse rate down to about 75. So an average heartbeat is about 75 beats per minute. But we can look at the activity of this conduction pathway, what's shown in yellow here. So the SA node, AV node, bundle, AV bundle, bundle branches, and Purkinje fibers. We can see how well they're working together by looking at what's called an EKG. An EKG has a standard pattern that repeats itself. We're always going to see a little bump here, the P wave, which means the atria are contracting. They're receiving that impulse. And then this narrow QRS wave means the ventricles have received the impulse and they're getting ready to contract. And then the T wave here means the ventricles are now relaxing as the heart is getting ready to fill with blood. So each of these electrical impulses sends a wave that can be measured on an EKG, and we can look for heart damage that way. For example, if this wave is very abnormal, this is a sign that the ventricles are just quivering. They're not fully contracting. We don't see a nice, narrow, tall QRS wave. We see a lot of kind of short, irregular waves indicating the ventricles are not contracting appropriately. And in this case, ventricular fibrillation, this patient would need they would need someone to come and shock the heart with an AED, an automatic electronic defibrillator. So they would need that to kind of zap that heart back into the rhythm if possible. Another measurement we make looking at cardiovascular health other than an EKG is looking at blood pressure. So this device here is called a sphygmatometer, kind of a mouthful, but basically what we're doing is squeezing an artery with the cuff, and then as the heart contracts and beats, we're going to hear a little tapping sound, and the first moment we hear the tapping, clear tapping sound, that's when the heart is contracting. We call that the systolic blood pressure. And then when that tapping sound goes away, we can assume the blood is flowing freely through the vessel as the heart is relaxing. That's called diastole. So diastole is a measurement of pressure when the heart is contracting, and diastole is a measurement of pressure in the vessel when the heart is relaxing. So when we look at numbers related to heart health, any number above 139 is considered hypertension, and there's different stages of hypertension. Very serious if our blood pressure, systolic, that top number should be greater than 180. We call that hypertensive crisis, and that can cause damage to the kidneys and the brain. So we need to be seen, or have an individual be seen if their blood pressure is that high. So it's good to know what everybody's blood pressure is and get that checked occasionally, just to know, how your vessels and your heart are working, and to treat any hypertension that might be starting to develop. So when we look at the veins, like we talked about, they don't have a high pressure circuit with the heart pumping blood through them. What they have are muscles surrounding them that when they contract, it prevents the backflow and pushes the blood forward. So as we contract our muscles, blood is pushed upward to the heart, and then the valves prevent the backflow. As the blood wants to flow back, it closes those valves to keep our blood moving in a forward direction. So that's why exercise is so good for blood flow, is it keeps our blood moving through our veins and going toward the heart. And good functioning valves are going to prevent that backflow. So we only see our valves in the veins, not in the arteries, and definitely not in the capillaries. So we'll pick up in the next video looking at the different circuits of blood flow throughout the body.